Good evening. Welcome to the first episode of Certified Hoops, where we'll be talking all basketball, from players, coaches schemes, to the rules of the game in general. I'm here today with entrepreneur and former New York Knick, also current head coach of Heritage Christian High School Boys Varsity Program, Mr. Patrick Eddy. Our next guest was a multi-talented athlete at Racine Park High, earning scholarships for basketball and football. He chose to take his talents to Marquette University. Since then, he has coached many teams in municipal leagues, Mr. Johnny Miller. Last but not least, we have former head coach of Milwaukee Area Technical College women's basketball, as well as assistant coach for the men's team. He is the current head coach of the Spring City Ballers out of Texas, Mr. Arom Murrell. And I'm your host, Alvin James. On today's show, we will be discussing the giants of basketball, the center position. There's been a lot of talented big men like Bill Russell, Wilt Stilt, George Mikan, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to touch the hardwood. Johnny, what's the definition of a great big to you? What should they bring to your team?
The definition of a great big to me is a center that dominate the center, dominate the post, good offensive player, good defensive player, great passer, able to run the lane, and most of all, support and be the last line of defense when the guards or the forwards get away and want to try to make a layup and he's sitting there waiting for him. I think that's what I see as a good center. And I grew up at a time when Wilt Chamberlain was playing, George Mikan, Bill Russell, and I saw all those guys in their prime. And one thing I would say, Bill Russell was probably the greatest defensive player that ever lived. I don't have to tell you guys that. You already know that. But on the other side of that coin, Chamberlain made Bill Russell look like he was a high school player a lot of times. And they gave Bill Russell the latitude to play tougher defense on Wilt Chamberlain. And as a kid, I always thought that was unfair.
Okay.
I said, man, they letting them beat up Wilt.
Patrick, what do you think about that?
As it relates to the center position, it's definitely dominance. You want to have a guy in the middle that will bring you fear. You know, the team should be fearful of this big guy that they face each night. From personal experience, Shaquille O'Neal.
Okay.
I literally would have to pray before I would go out and play against him because honestly, this guy, you knew you were going out here to work. He was a great athlete, just quick and strong. Would make your whole offensive scheme change because you couldn't run your normal offense in the interior. Right. You know, so guys like Wilt Chamberlain and Shaquille O'Neal are in a class of their own. I think Wilt was in a class of his own before Shaq came. Okay. Because these are guys that can just destroy the basket. And I had the honor to watch Shaq when he was a freshman, when he didn't have the post moves and skills, when all he could do was dunk. But, you know, what else did he need to do?
Right. Yeah. Okay, Arom, what do you think a great center should bring to your team?
Well, I definitely concur with both, Johnny and Patrick. You definitely want someone who's got that dominance. When you first come out of the locker room, you want to see how big a team is. You want that big center to be your beast. You see him, wow, not only is he big, but he's also, one that's going to command the attention, not just from just visual, but it's going to do those things, get you a lot of boards, be strong around the rim. Be also an offensive presence, command the ball, knowing that he can produce offensively for his team. So dominant centers, in my opinion, of course, everyone's mentioned Wilt and Shaq because, again, Wilt being, I guess, what Shaq has been for us in modern time, that was Wilt back in the day. And Wilt, if you will, kind of set that standard. There was nobody that could really handle him or deal with him, In modern days, that was Shaquille O'Neal. Okay. So, when you get players of that nature, I think those are the perfect examples of what we like to believe or think of as being dominant centers.
Okay. Now, is there any other dominant centers that you guys probably haven't touched on that you would like to touch on? Johnny, what you think?
I think one was a shooting star, but due to injuries and a lot of mishaps, Bill Walton was pretty good his first 2 or 3 years. In fact, I remember Munchberger said, this guy is going to be the greatest center that ever lived. And I was sitting there thinking as a little kid, I said, you got to wait till the guy perform over a number of years. You just can't give him that title at this point. And then true enough, because of injuries, he did not pan out to be as great a center as he was in college.
Right,
but he did put up some good statistics his first 3 years and won a championship.
Okay. What about you, Pat?
We got to think about guys on the other side of the water like Arvydas Sabonis, who was a point guard and he had a growth spurt, but then he came back over here to be a great center as well. I had the pleasure of playing against both him and Shaq. And I tried to do the same scheme that I did against Shaq. It didn't work for Sabonis. I took Shaq and I went outside and did a few moves. I tried to do those moves in Sabonis and he just looked at me. So when you have guys with the size, the strength, and the athleticism, it's tough. The only thing you can really do is shoot against them.
Okay. Anybody that you would like to mention that haven't been mentioned?
You know, it's kind of funny because I actually had a short list. I had a few. But I'm going to pick one locally. I don't know if people really appreciate the talents that our own Bob Lanier brought to the court. Bob Lanier was one of those guys. He was, by most center sizes, he was undersized. He's like 6'10". But at that time, he was able to get you 20, 25 points a night, get you 15, 16 rebounds a night. He played excellent defense, you know, and he was a student of the game.
Okay.
So that definitely was someone that stuck out in my mind in terms of dominant centers that may or may not have been on our list.
Okay, all right. So when we return, we're going to keep talking great centers right here on Certified Hoops.
I'm proud of each and every last one of y'all. I wasn't thinking we was gonna get out of that alive, y'all. I thought they had us. But y'all came out, y'all stuck with it. Y'all persistent. Y'all play real offense. When you get back on the defensive end, you gotta act like you want it. You gotta act tough. You gotta be bold. We gotta get it to where we don't allow them to do nothing in our
Jeez, what's going on, man? It's my team, man.
motivation, coach.
Bring it in. Hawthorne on 3.
1, 2, 3, I go!
Welcome back to Certified Hoops. If you're just tuning in, me and the panel are discussing the greatest centers in NBA history. Now let's talk pure dominant forces to come through the NBA. I'm talking all-out monsters. Who's been the best you guys have seen control the paint? Arom.
Wow. Well, you know, we don't want to make this program all wilt, but it definitely could be. You know, maybe he set the standard. But if we want to get into some of the more modern time athletes, some that maybe people can relate to, you definitely have to talk about, obviously, Shaquille O'Neal's. But I can't help but to mention Hakeem Olajuwon. You know, I would like to believe that if it wasn't for the great Michael Jeffrey Jordan, him and some of those Houston Rocket teams may have seen a couple of more championships. You know, he had a million moves. But in addition to that, though, you talk about defending. He was an all-defensive player for a number of the years in the league. Of course, he came out of college as pretty much a predominantly defensive player. But as he learned the game and learned footwork and offensive skills and offensive schemes, there was no way you could go out there and game plan against a guy like Hakeem Olajuwon.
Okay. What about you,
That's a
Pat?
good
Who you think control the paint? What great centers you think control the paint?
Well, of course, I do have to go back to Wilt because nobody has hit 100 points yet. You know, and that's, you know, you have the argument of the times and the guys he played against. Still remains to be seen. 100 points, that's saying a lot. He was just a great athlete. Outside of basketball, he played volleyball professionally. These are guys that you just, when you play against them, you just have to pray. I'm being honest with you. You really have to pray and say, what am I going to do? And the closest thing to him is Shaq. I mean, Shaq was so mobile and agile, you know, and strong and quick. So, and he improved. So these two guys are, you want to talk about monsters? Those are the two monsters.
Okay. Johnny, what do you think about the great centers that control the paint real good?
I have to concur with these two gentlemen that Shaq, Wilt Chamberlain, and then, you know, the only reason I'm going to throw Bill Russell in it is because he was the professor of defense. And what I mean by professor of defense, he brought to the game intellect, smarts, intelligence. And And when he blocked a shot, he wasn't glorified by throwing it out of bounds and then going up in the crowd. He blocked the shot, grabbed it, passed it for a fast break. So he made it a productive event versus throwing it out of bounds, giving the other team another possession. Not only that, this black man, if you look at history, was one of your first black coaches in the league. And he was a player coach as well, and won a championship as a player coach. And so I thought he brought intellect to the game. He brought dominating force in the middle, and he was truly an intellectual monster. And he helped his team win, 11 championships?
Okay.
So I would say between those three, those would be your dominant forces in the NBA up to this point.
Well, I have researched also, and as far as the guys controlling the paint, one name that you guys haven't brought up, and when I say control the paint, I'm looking more like defensively. I'm looking at somebody like Dikembe Mutombo.
Okay.
What do you think about him?
Well, I like Dikembe. You're right. He definitely was a defender, no doubt. Everybody knows about the famed finger wave.
Not in my house.
Not in my house. And honestly, I can definitely appreciate that because, again, as Johnny mentioned earlier, you want your center to be your last line of defense. But I mentioned another one that we haven't spoken of thus far too, and I don't know if you guys remember 4-4-4.
Oh,
Moses
man.
Malone.
Moses Malone was also that kind of a ball player.
Yeah.
He was one of those that, he got lost in some of those mediocre teams down in Houston early in his career, but when he got to Philly and and linked up with some of those talented Philly teams, some of his own athleticism and some of his own abilities also came to fruit. So, we probably are throughout the course of this going to find that there's a couple of them sitting in the bushes somewhere that we'll be able to pull out.
Exactly.
I want to pull one out of the bush for you.
Matt, pull one
Since
out.
we're talking about shot blockers, Harvey Catchings, man, this guy, man, he's probably like 6'9", but I think he had a 42-inch vertical.
Right.
Yeah, he did.
And, man, he would just, I don't care what type of shots you put up, he would throw it in the stands.
Exactly.
I'm just telling you. So that's one of the guys who I would say as it relates to just dominant as it relates to blocking shots.
Blocking shots. What about you, John? Do you have any ones we haven't touched
Well,
on
you
as
got
of yet?
Nate Thurman, Willis Reed. There's about 4 or 5 other centers you can throw into that in that category that we probably haven't talked about, but because the other players' accomplishments were so high, I think we can put them in that second tier. They were great defensive centers. They command the middle. They were great passers, great defenders, and then, most of all, they were good teammates. They know how to help out, and they were intelligent ball players.
Right. Now, a lot of people talk about as far as the old schooler centers like the Wilt Chamberlains, the Bill Russells, and things of that nature. They talk about, the competition level that they played back then wasn't as good as the competition level with the Shaquille O'Neals and things of like that, and that's why they have such prolific numbers and everything. I mean, do you feel that's a true statement, or what's your explanation of that?
And my opinion about that is, if you look at Wilt, he filled the stat book up. 72 statistics in the NBA. At one point, I think less than 6 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, he had 68 of those. In the last 8 years, the NBA players are a little bit more athletic. They run better. There's no doubt about that. There's been some improvement in our skills are concerned. And so 8 of his records have disappeared. That's fine. Getting back to your essential question, different eras, people, athletes do improve. There's no doubt about it. Wilt was a freak of nature at the time. He was born 20 years before his time. Because he was so athletic, he could take quarters off the top of the rim, and you see Dwight Howard trying to put a sticker on the backboard. Wilt was jumping a foot higher than that. He bragging about being Superman. I guess Wilt was Superman times 2. But at any rate, get back to your initial point. Yeah, the talent was probably a little bit lesser competitively, and he was able to fill the record books up. At one point, Wilt said, I ought to come back and play in the NBA and put my scoring record so high that nobody could reach it. And so you could tell he still thought he had that talent and that skill to play with today's player. One last point. I did see him play against Jabbar. And Jabbar was trying that famous hook. And I watched Wilt jump up and grab it with one hand. And I said, if this guy was in the league at that time at the same age, Jabbar would have had a hard time playing against Wilt. The guy had a vertical out this world.
Okay. All right. Hey, don't change your channel. We'll be back in a sec. We're back, and our topic is great centers of the NBA. Coach Murrell, would you rather take a scoring big or a defensive anchor, and why?
I'd rather have a defensive anchor. That's no question, without a doubt in my mind for me. And it's very simple. When you got one of those bad shooting nights, you got to get stops. You have to get stops. And, I don't want to sound cliche-ish, but, they always say defense wins championships. And it's pretty obvious that, when you have those poor nights where you can't put the ball in the bucket, you want to have somebody to stop, the other team's offense just as well. So it's definitely a pleasure to have a guy who you can count on back there to be at the right position at the right time when your guards and your wing players are getting beat off the dribble. And somebody back there to clean the glass, get rebounds for you. Offense is definitely a luxury because you have other players who also have the ability, your shooters, your slashers, to get you those points. But I personally would rather have a defender.
Okay. Pat, what about you? A offensive player or a defensive anchor?
Definitely defensive anchor. Like I say, once again, if you have a defense that can change your offensive scheme, you're hitting it on both levels. And I just want to mention a real nice dynamic duo in big men, and that's Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale. Man, when you have both of those guys in the paint, it is tough to get points in there. And they're both great offensive basic players, But as it relates to defense, it's tough. Going back to Sabonis, there was another guy, I can't think of his name. And throughout my career, if I could remember one thing, they just did a pick and roll from block to block. And before you get a chance to get around the pick, they had the ball in the basket. So defense is the one.
Defense?
Yeah.
What about you, Johnny?
I think it's a trifecta. Defense is the key. You want to have a center that's defensively dominant. But you know me, I'm pro-offense. I'd rather have really a center. I hear what they just said, and that's true. I figure I could teach a person how to play defense.
Right.
And so I would want a 60-40, 60% offensively minded and 40% defense.
Okay.
And that way you get a combination of both. But I know the answer was black or white. Do you want a defense or offensive player?
Right.
And I think I would take defense ultimately, hoping I can teach my center how to do it, show the hookup.
Okay. All right.
There we go.
All right. So, like I said, as far as the defensive anchor, obviously we going with that. A lot of the panel going with the defensive anchor, but I know they said defense wins championships and just offense just wins games. So, hopefully that there's other defensive centers out there that we haven't mentioned yet that can probably we can touch on also. What do you think, Arom?
Well, we obviously we want to talk about defense, but when you talk about offense from the center position, without mentioning Wilt, we got to talk about Kareem. Right? We got to talk about Kareem. He is the NBA's all-time leading scorer at 38,000 points, and that's just not by happenstance. He obviously had the privilege of playing with one of the greatest point guards of all time to give him the ball. But at the same time, though, he had to have the ability to put the ball in the hoop himself. So he obviously would be number one, and he's not number one just by mistake. But he was also just a student of the game. Kareem brought intelligence. He brought a certain skill set. And I heard you mention Bill Walton earlier. Bill Walton was another one of those centers who definitely you had to be concerned with points. He led his team, night in and night out. He was one of those people that you had to be concerned with. So when you talk about some of the great centers of all time offensively, you definitely have to mention Kareem and Bill Walton, and I'm sure that both Johnny and Patrick have some that they want to.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been a lot of high-scoring centers out there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Now there's also been, you talk about your defensive anchors, but hasn't there been NBA centers that were a defensive anchor but was also prolific scorers also? Now, who would some of those be, Johnny?
I would say you got Willis Reed in the clutch, injured, 24/7. He would always come to play no matter what, and he always get drop 30 on you. Right. You obviously you got Shaq. Shaq just got whatever he wanted in his youth. Pretty much. And then you have Willis Reed. You have Ralph Sampson with the crazy shot where he jumped in the air and threw the one out the back of his neck and went in and won the championship. You got a lot of athletic high-scoring centers out in the league. So you mentioned Sabonis.
Sabonis, for
Sabonis
sure.
is kind of crazy. Let me just divert back to Sabonis. I actually watched him on film when he played in Russia when he was young. This guy had a 40-something inch vertical at 7'2".
Before his
And
legs
he,
went bad.
and he was ridiculous. But he got old when he came to the NBA. He was above average center at that time, but he would have been a superior one if he came when he was younger. So I would throw him in that group.
Okay.
Right. I
And
have
you got
to say,
David Robinson.
Yes.
He was David Robinson was athletic, very studious.
Right.
He knew how to play with other players. I remember when Duncan came, he changed his role. He was able to blend in and make sure that he complemented this young player. And now Duncan's a great player.
Probably because of that.
He also trained in how to teach other players how to be great and made his team better. Those are the centers you got to look at as well.
Well, you can't forget about Patrick Ewing.
Oh, man.
He's a monster. He's definitely a monster.
Definitely.
Changed his offensive game. I mean, he had nice post move, but there was a big point in his career where he was just dominant, dunking the ball, But then he changed it to that turnaround jump
That
shot.
fade
So
away.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Don't change your channel. We'll be back in a sec.
yeah.
Bruh, give me 5 minutes. I'll be outside. 5 minutes. Alright. We found this box. And JP wanna give it back. But I'm saying let's keep it.
It's right here. We just gotta grab these boxes we got left at his house. Yeah.
I found another box.
He got a job freelancing.
Back quick.
Yeah, he
Just
flew out to Rome this morning. Did you take it?
Awesome. JP.
Benjamin.
Dang, awesome. World. Cheech Marley. YDVA. Grind hard.
Okay, we're back here on Certified Hoops. What we want to do now is just talk about, our basketball knowledge and the history of the game as far as that we was involved in, as far as, the accomplishments that you have made in your basketball careers, be it a player or a coach. Aaron, what about you?
Well, obviously, I haven't had the opportunity to play at the level that Patrick has, so I can't say I ran into a Shaquille O'Neal, or some of those other monsters that we spoke of already. But, in my collegiate playing days, I played Division II ball. Definitely had the privilege of playing with some guys who probably had the ability, or at least the heart, to be considered amongst the conversation of those. I played with a 6'9" gentleman from Illinois. He was a transfer from Illinois State, left-handed guy. And when I tell you that he was not only an athlete, but he had one of the most prettiest jump shots. He was a lefty. He could go to the paint, post you up. He had great footwork. He had that Sabonis footwork, if you will, because Sabonis had that footwork. But he also had the ability to step out and stretch the defenses and knock down those long-range jump shots. He could shoot the three. We had plays designed for him to shoot the three. And also another front court player that I played with along with him on that same team was just the beast in the paint. Rebound, just a rebound machine, but also running plays for him on the block. You could almost guarantee that he was going to hit high shooting percentage. So just on my own personal playing level experiences, those guys stand out. Now, as far as coaching, I've seen a number of them come through. You get guys who just have natural talent, but it's up to us as coaches to develop that into something, into some of those guys that we spoke on. So it definitely spans. I could be here all night telling you about some of the guys I've played or either coached with.
What about you, Johnny?
You know what? I'm really a professional pickup game artist.
Yeah, I remember.
But you remember them days, don't you? But anyway, I played at Marquette. And I basically walked on the team. I had an opportunity to play with Maurice Lucas. I grew up with Jim Jones, who was a good center at Marquette for a couple of years, and he got drafted by Cleveland. One of the first millionaires draftees that I knew and grew up with. And so he had a nice career in the NBA, won a NBA championship with LA. McIlvain, a bunch of the big guys that played for Marquette as centers. I played with just about every team that they basically had, a lot of the players that came through that program. Played a lot of pickup games with this gentleman across this way. We had a lot of playing with everybody basically in the city through as far as centers are concerned, those would be my only personal references as far as playing with centers. In fact, one time back in the day when the Bucks used to play with normal guys like me, Kareem Abdul, you had him play down at the gym with us. I seen how he just destroyed everybody in pickup games. And normally he wouldn't play pickup games, but this particular day he was at the gym. So I've observed all kind of centers through the league in pickup games and watched a lot of them on TV play. But I have no personal experience in terms of guarding them in the NBA. That's something Patrick would be able to help us with.
Okay, so that's our show for today. We at Certified Hoops would like to thank the panel, Patrick, Arom, and Johnny, along with you viewers out there for watching. I'm Alvin James. Keep hooping, Hoopers.